Tomorrow you're going to see headlines, Trump wants an extra term. I told you. He wants an extra. He wants an extra term, ladies and gentlemen. We told you. We told you he's a dictator. We told you.
President Trump joking, we think, about serving a third term, taunting the press at a North Carolina rally. Do his insults, rants, rage, tweets, and feuds, in short, his unpresidential behavior, matter politically? Or will GOP voters just shrug it off in 2020? We'll talk politics in a minute. I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Also on tap, there's a civil war in the New York City Police Department. The leader of the PBA, the police union, ripping into the police commissioner over the firing of a cop whose use of a chokehold killed Eric Garner. Times big city columnist Ginia Bellafante will tell us about her reporting on the story. And Michael Bloomberg, a giant figure in New York, he still is, the multi-billionaire businessman and philanthropist, served 3 terms as mayor. Eleanor Randolph will talk about her definitive biography of Mayor Mike, reviewed in Sunday's Times Book Review. But we begin with politics. President Trump spent day after day doubling down again and again on his false statement that Hurricane Dorian was going to hit Alabama hard. He even held up a government weather map that was doctored with a Sharpie. That capped off a summer where he sent out racist tweets about 4 female members of Congress, spent plenty of time trash tweeting. You might think that such unpresidential behavior would have hurt him politically. Well, think again. Think back to 2016 when multiple women accused him of sexual misconduct, when he blasted a Gold Star family and an American-born federal judge of Mexican heritage. And remember the notorious Access Hollywood tape. I'm only skimming the surface. Will any of this behavior matter to the Trump base and to Republican voters next year, or will they just ignore it? Will Trump's reelection bid ultimately rise or fall on the economy? Eleanor Randolph, a Times contributing writer, Clyde Haberman, also a Times contributing writer. The president said at one point he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue. It wouldn't matter. Is this still true?
Well, he was right back then when he said it. He wasn't president yet, but polls show that his approval ratings are shrinking. They're shrinking where it might be very critical, which is among suburbanites and especially suburban women. Whether this is going to be the same deal a year from now, who knows? I don't believe in making predictions. But, you know, whether it hurts him politically or not, it has to be called out for what it is. It is disgusting behavior. The man is a sociopath. He even managed about 20 minutes before he was going to the 9/11 ceremony in Washington. He rattled off some, self-centered tweet about the fake news media again. The man is a narcissistic putz, and it is. I've never seen anything. No, but none of us have ever seen anything like it. And if we're talking about his hardcore base, no, it won't make a difference. But they are the deplorables that Hillary Clinton talked about. There's no other way to look at them.
You talk about the man has to be called out, but David Axelrod had an op-ed piece in the Times the other day saying he shouldn't be called out, in effect, by the Democratic candidates.
I'm not running for president. I'm a writer. It is our job to call him for who he is and what he is.
Axelrod's point was that Trump will kill off Trump if you just let him continue to do all these
But
things.
It's taken a long time so far.
Not only that, I'm not sure I trust the polls, because about this time in 2015, we thought that Hillary Clinton had it locked up. And so, who knows what's going to happen. And, you've got 10 Democrats really in the final running. Who knows who's going to pull out of that race. I'm really concerned. Clyde's talking about all these horrible antics and racist statements, but underneath that, you're starting to see this man destroy parts of the government. I mean, the environment everything, every area of the environment is being destroyed by him and by his people in office. And you know, the weather map that you were talking about, it's stupid. But what happened was that you know, that NOAA, the our National Weather Service, said, you know, this wasn't true, and so it became a case of the Trump people saying, well, who cares if it's true? If the president says it, it's true. That's crazy.
What I don't understand is we are focusing, maybe having fun focusing on the chaos in the White House, the ridiculous tweets of the president. But you're right. Meanwhile, he is in effect, or the people around him in effect, are dismantling the government, certainly in the environmental area.
And there's a war on science in general, whether it is the environment, whether it is the Weather Service, the National Oceanographic, and I forget what the other A stands for. Atmospheric, thank you, agency. So, and there are other examples of this, in which this is a know-nothing government that doesn't want to hear any information that is empirically valid and obvious even. Throw in the fact that he wants to erase every vestige of the first black president. It's not just about Obama. There is no question in my mind, anyway, that this is a racist motivated. He wants Obama never to have existed, in effect, and so he is undoing everything that Obama did.
I'm struck, too, that we are so far from the election, even so far, maybe a little less far from the primaries, and we're still relying on national polls, which are fairly meaningless, debates where, you know, I'm not sure how many people are actually watching and can, if you stop people on the street, ask them to differentiate among the candidates. And then we had a special section in the Times the other day, Amanda Hess writing, a politician may hope that her image resonates positively with voters, but maybe it's enough that her image resonates at all. Is that where we've come to in politics and campaigning?
I'm not quite sure I get that, to tell you the truth. What is she saying?
Well, I guess what she's saying is that it doesn't matter what you say as long as you're out there saying something.
Well, at some point that's probably true, but only up to a point. At some point, I still like to think we're not so far gone that hideous and endless comments by even the president go totally ignored. Look, the man still lost by just about 3 million votes the last time. Listen, he won on the basis of this electoral fluke that is our ridiculous electoral college system. So, but when it came down to it, he lost a popular vote. And every indication is he'll do it again, which doesn't mean he won't be reelected, but it won't necessarily be because he's popular. I don't agree with that statement of hers. You know, it's not just a matter of, and you can say anything and get away with it. Part of the problem is that he entered national politics as after having been a television performer for a dozen years or so on that idiot show of his. So the image of him was locked in the minds of millions and millions of voters. And nothing that was said by him or by those opposing him was going to alter their impression of him. TV does form that kind of image.
Thanks to Clyde Haberman. Eleanor Randolph will join us again in a little while to talk about her terrific new book, The Many Lives of Michael Bloomberg. Up next, New York's police department at war with itself. Ginia Bellafante takes you behind the blue wall.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
I can't breathe. It became a rallying cry for protesters after chokehold by a cop killed Eric Garner, who was selling loose cigarettes in Staten Island. No indictment of the cop, but after 5 years, he was eventually fired by the N.Y.P.D. The PBA, police union, was beyond furious. Its pugnacious president, Pat Lynch, bashed the mayor and the police commissioner. Meanwhile, there have been a rash of police suicides, and Lynch and top police brass have a very different attitude toward these tragedies. So what's behind the civility that was in the NYPD? Ginia Bellafante is the New York Times' big city columnist. She wrote about it. Ginia, how do we square these two attitudes? James O'Neill, the commissioner, has spoken honestly, compassionately, as you wrote, about the rash of suicides. Lynch seeming to stir up anger both with the community and the police brass. How do we square these? How do we reconcile them?
Well, I think it's going to be an ongoing problem. I mean, Lynch did this video that he posted on Twitter, and he had the Nancy Reagan in the 80s approach to drugs, to suicide, just don't do it. And that, of course, seemed very odd to a lot of people, and really, really, really out of touch with a much sort of a softer NYPD, shall we say. They're trying really to come back from the brutality of the stop and frisk era and rebrand in a way. And you have this union that is doing something completely oppositional to the program.
Well, is it a fact that if cops seek help, psychological help, whatever, it could affect their career?
I mean, Lynch would say that they are, they're fingered. You still have a very masculine culture in the department, obviously. I'm sure there is resistance in the rank and file. People are not necessarily bred to expect therapy and seek it out. But I don't know if that in fact is true. If certainly the NYPD seems to really be responding to this crisis, and I doubt they are going to allow that kind of culture to continue.
Given the numbers, as you say, it certainly seems to have reached crisis proportions. How do other cities respond to this, or don't other cities have the same problem? I mean,
New York is obviously a stressful place to be a police officer. It's a huge force. And we have an insurance system that doesn't necessarily cover the high cost of therapists in New York. In New York, you're always paying the rent. Whenever you're paying a bill for anything, therapists here are much more expensive than they are in other parts of the country, and the insurance system really has to reflect what the prices are.
Does the department have enough therapists on staff, or do they recommend people?
No, O'Neill is adding therapists in the field, which should be interesting, but I think the cost is an issue.
The cost of hiring?
No, I'm sorry. The cost of getting individual regular therapy in this city is tough.
Has the mayor signed on to pay for the cost, or?
I don't know if he has signed on yet. It's just something O'Neill's proposed very recently.
Let me ask you another question, a column coming up in the Times on vaccinations. You're writing that parents who are opposed to having their kids vaccinated are now taking them out of school and homeschooling them.
Yes.
How big a phenomenon is that?
Well, we don't know yet because the school year has just begun. There has been, interestingly, an uptick in the number of families homeschooling in New York over the past few years. And this is presumed to bring a really, really big increase. People who work in homeschooling, teachers, consultants, parents who are homeschooling are finding that the community is growing hugely with people who are removing themselves from the traditional school system because they simply would rather stay home, upend their lives, or hire tutors to teach their kids rather than simply getting the vaccines that we know are safe.
Mm-hmm. And why is there any group of people? I mean, we've obviously seen certain communities opposed to vaccines. Is there any group that we see are homeschooling?
Well, what's interesting is there's a real contingent of people who are not necessarily anti every vaccine. They want a slowed down schedule. The state demands that you have certain vaccines at a certain time, that you have 8 by the time you're in school. People want a slower scheduling. A lot of people that we're seeing homeschooling now simply want the autonomy. Their kids might have the measles vaccine, but they want to do it their way.
And going back quickly to the Eric Garner case, looking at it in retrospect, does the department suggest any new way of handling matters like this so it doesn't take 5 years from the incident to a firing Have the commissioner and Pat Lynch somehow discussed this to find a better way of doing it, one way or the other?
Clearly, the better way is to proceed as quickly as possible with an internal investigation. You know, this administration has said all along that it took such an incredibly long time because they were waiting for the federal, and that one should not be contingent on the other.
So they could have gone ahead, or
absolutely.
in the future
Yeah.
would.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Ginia Bellafante, the Big City column in the New York Times. Former Mayor Mike Bloomberg now has a biography that matches his outsized presence in the city. Eleanor Randolph standing by to talk about the many lives of Michael Bloomberg.
Now, we've heard a lot of talk in this campaign about needing a leader who understands business. I couldn't agree more. I built a business, and I didn't start it with $1 million check from my father.
Former Mayor Mike Bloomberg at the 2016 Democratic Convention, making his opinion of Donald Trump abundantly clear. Bloomberg has led an extraordinary life, an innovative businessman who became a multi-billionaire, a generous philanthropist, three-term mayor, deep-pocketed activist on issues like gun control and climate change. Our colleague Eleanor Randolph has written a deeply reported biography of Mayor Mike, the book getting high praise from Pulitzer Prize winners like Doris Kearns Goodwin and James Stewart. It's called The Many Lives of Michael Bloomberg, reviewed in the Sunday Times Book Review. David Greenberg calls it brisk and engaging. Eleanor, you say that despite some of the mayor's personal flaws, policy fiascos, his anti-democratic procedural end run to get a third term, he ranks by any fair reckoning as one of Gotham's all-time greatest leaders. Yet, you say you voted against him all three times. In retrospect, would you have voted for him?
Actually, I voted for him twice. That was David who voted.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was David, right.
David voted against it.
So,
but listen, I wrote editorials in the beginning for his opponent,
right.
Mark Green, and voted for Mark Green and not Michael Bloomberg in the beginning. I voted for Bloomberg the second and even the third term, I have to admit.
And you think he has redeemed himself, obviously.
I thought is there a perfect mayor? I don't think so. And I thought he made some mistakes. But I thought he really worked hard to improve the city and to just make the place work better and to expand the number of parks and there's a long list of things that he did that have made a lot of difference in this city.
One thing that Greenberg wrote in the review, and I'm not sure I agree with it either, is that Bloomberg's data-driven style of city government would make him unelectable now, that if he were running now, he couldn't get elected. What do you think?
I think if he decided to run in 2021, which is the next mayoral election, I think he probably could get elected. He doesn't sparkle, he doesn't give great political speeches or anything like that. But he's an engineer. He's Mr. Fix-It. He's methodical about the way he wants things to get fixed. And you got 311 as a result of that. And he was the nanny mayor who made sure that when people want to smoke, they now have to go out on the sidewalk and huddle like exiles, on the street.
How accessible was he when you did the research for this book?
Well, he gives a lot of interviews, so it was not, I had no trouble getting interviews and talking to him, and I had no trouble talking to his people. That was the main thing. I really, I wanted to sort of get down beneath the Bloomberg part of it and find out sort of how people felt about him, how they operated, how he was different, And
what did you find out that you didn't know before?
Well, he what I was interested in was how this businessman decided he was going to run the city. It was just what we saw at the Democratic National Convention, and he ran the city differently than he runs Bloomberg LP, because he's the Pope, and the word comes down and everybody has to obey. But in the city, what he did was he really delegated extremely well. He decided the main thing he had to do was hire the best people he could find. And he did, with a few exceptions, he did pretty well with that.
Was there any question you asked him that he wouldn't answer?
No.
You?
I mean, I don't think so. I didn't ask him I didn't ask about his sex life, for example. I didn't ask him really super personal questions like that.
They don't seem to be particularly relevant in his case.
Well, that's right. I felt that what was interesting about him was the way he'd operated, and the fact that he'd already had, when I started interviewing, he'd already had 3 lives, Our colleague, Joyce Pernick, wrote a really good book about him in 2009. And most of us, if we can manage one, we're doing pretty well.
Has he reacted yet to the book?
Yes. He called me to say it wasn't bad for a New York Times person. I guess that was a compliment.
I guess that's a compliment. Now, what is it like interviewing both him or the people around him for a book versus for a news article, or when you're doing an editorial?
Well, an editorial was easy because we always talk to people on background or off the record. You don't see many quotes in an editorial, and what we would do would be we rely on the quotes from the news side and get the background from other people. But the one thing I found with interviewing people is they were terrified of this guy, and there were a few people who talked on the record, but they were the exception. Most people wanted to run their quotes, check on their quotes and do all this other stuff. I mean, okay, he's worth $56 billion, so they're intimidated by that.
Quick question, would he have made a good president?
I can't imagine him actually getting there, campaigning and getting there, but I think he would have been an excellent president.
Thanks to Eleanor Randolph for joining us of the New York Times, and I'll add my thoughts on CODA coming up next. Trees and sidewalks have never had an easy time together in New York, yet each in its own way has been emblematic of the city. With all due respect to Frank Sinatra, East Side, West Side, or the sidewalks of New York remains the city's unofficial anthem for those whose hearts still beat with nostalgia. And how many novels epitomize the immigrant city more than Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn? The song and the book were finally reconciled this week by Mayor de Blasio and Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie. They announced that homeowners will no longer be held accountable for damage to sidewalks caused by city-owned trees. That might not seem like a big concession, but remember, New York is a city of superlatives. We've got more than 650,000 street trees, more than 5,000 high-priority damaged sidewalk sites that are all but inviting pedestrians to take a crack and twist an ankle or break a limb, and more than 50,000 pending violations against homeowners, summonses that would never have been issued if the municipal government had taken responsibility for city-owned trees in the first place. The proverbial tree that grew in Brooklyn was in a yard, not at the curb. It was an Elianthus altissima, a so-called tree of heaven. In the 19th century, New Yorkers complained that those trees smelled. The Times even urged that the Chinese imports all be uprooted. and likening the alien tree to the influx of wretched masses of tired and poor, the Times described the ailanthus as, quote, filthy and worthless foreigner. It's not on the Parks Department list of approved street trees for planting, but it's such a New York kind of tree. Untrained, unruly, stoic. A tree, Betty Smith wrote, that liked poor people. It is the only tree that grows out of cement, she wrote. It survives without sun, water, and seemingly without earth. No matter where its seed fell, it made a tree which struggled to reach the sky. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.